I invite you to open your Bibles to Matthew chapter 7 and place your bookmark in that text. Matthew chapter 7, very end of the chapter, somewhere in that area, verse 24 and following. Just place your bookmark there. It will benefit you in our study. It's a blessing to be together, to enjoy what makes Sundays the best day of the week. And make no mistake about it, Sundays are indeed the very best day of the week because of our time together in worship, our time in study, our time to encourage our brethren. Rylan texted me and asked what song would go well with the 9:30. I did not make a song request for Punnett Squares. I'm not sure we have a song that fits that in our songbook, but Steve asked, and I said something on the solid rock, something on Jesus being, obedience, and he kind of listened. So that was, I partially thank him for that, even though he had to make a dig at me. It's a blessing to be together this morning. Such a blessing to be able to come together and encourage each other and to be in the book. Matthew 7, please, verse 24. Therefore, whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will liken him to a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain descended, the floods came, the winds blew and beat on that house, and it did not fall, for it was founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these sayings of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain descended, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. And it came to pass, when Jesus had ended these sayings, that the people were astonished at His teaching, for He taught them as one having authority, and not as the scribes. Back just a couple of months ago, I'm doing some history lessons with the girls, and we were discussing the Leeds Bridge in St. Louis, Missouri, and it was one of the first bridges to cross the Mississippi River. Pretty impressive industrial feat that this structure was built in the mid-late 1800s, and yet they crossed the mighty Mississippi River. And how they did it was they took and went out into the river and dug down below the water level, below the soil level, underneath the river, and put it down in the rock. Pretty incredible, almost as incredible as the fact that bridge is still there. The Eads Bridge is still there in St. Louis. When you take these great big structures, it needs a great big foundation to hold it. We're actually familiar with some of the great structural feats of the last couple of hundred years. We're also familiar with some of the great big disasters. The Great Leaning Tower of Pisa. Not pizza, but Pisa. I don't know, I'm not Italian. But you take that great big tower, and what's wrong with it? Why does it lean? Because poor foundation work. There's actually a skyscraper in, I believe it's San Francisco right now, that they're trying to figure out what to do with it, because it's a great big place where rich people live, and yet it's sinking. And the reason being, on that edge of California, they can't get enough foundation work done underneath it. Wow. In this particular sermon, I would argue the greatest sermon ever preached, Jesus has been slowly inching towards the conclusion. We would actually be thinking, he's looking at the song leader at this point, and the song leader's fidgeting with his pitch pipe, and the song leader's opening out his songbook, and he's looking at him and making sure he's ready as he inches closer to the invitation. And now he's going to lay in some very important points, the very tail end of this sermon, about foundation work, about how we build a life on the solid foundation so that it will stand when the storm comes. Well, brethren, I want us to see the import of that at the end of this sermon. I want us to see the import of that in our own lives as we strive to be faithful disciples of King Jesus, and with no subtlety at all. I want you to understand, you have one of two options. That's it. One of two options. And brethren, we need to see that at the end of the greatest sermon ever preached. I want to make a couple of observations, and then I want to conclude with a question for your consideration. Let's think about this text, shall we? Number one, and this is where we're going to spend more time than the other points, but number one, wisdom builds wisely. I want you to see this in verse 24. Wisdom builds wisely. And we need to understand, I'm not wasting words when I make this point. Wisdom is not this esoteric experiment where you just know things. No, no, no. Wisdom is action, but wisdom is a particular kind of action. Do you see that? Wisdom builds wisely. It's not a given that it just exists. It builds, and it builds wisely. Verse 24, therefore whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will liken him to a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain descended, the floods came, the winds blew, beat on that house, and it did not fall, for it was founded on the rock. Verse 26 is just as important. Everyone who hears these sayings of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. Do you notice, brethren, both are building. Both are busy, both are active, both are doing, but they're not doing the same thing. Wisdom builds wisely, whereas the fool builds foolishly. Wisdom is not just knowing. Wisdom is knowing and acting upon what you know. Let's put this into real practical terms. You say, well, I know how to build a house. Well, that doesn't mean anything if you don't build a house, does it? You look at your sweetheart and you say, well, my dear, I can remodel that kitchen. Oh, honey, you're so smart. Oh, honey, you're so wise. Oh, honey, you're so good with your hands. But it doesn't make one diddly bit of difference if you don't build what she wants. Wisdom builds wisely. Maybe, brethren, we should make the application, then we need to be careful where we get our information. There's a whole lot of people that know a lot about stuff but aren't living what they know. And that is never more important than in an age of influencers. Well, they know something, but they don't know anything that they're living. One of the things cracked me up several years ago, I listened to Dave Ramsey's son, the great big financial guru, and he makes some similar point to don't listen to your broke uncle for financial advice. And the reason is, he's like, oh, he gives great advice, and it works so glowingly, doesn't it? He's your broke uncle, remember? You take advice about money from people who make money. You take advice from people about money who've made wise investments with their money. We were watching something the other day. For the life of me, I could not remember what it was, but these two kids were talking, and one of the kids turns to the other one and says, you should ask my uncle for marriage advice. He's really good at it. He's been married 5 times. And for the life of me, I could not remember where that came from, but that's how we sometimes think, isn't it? We're not so discerning about what the information is or the source of the information. We just think, well, that's great advice. It's so great that they're not even listening to it. Folks, wisdom builds wisely. It doesn't matter how much you know if you're not going out and doing it. And what we're after in this whole discussion is not exposure to the Word. You understand that, right? We're not after exposure to the Word. We're after expression of the Word in real life. People who go and do. And people who go and do wisely. The wise man who built his house on the rock. In verse 25, when the rain descends, the floods come, the winds blow and beat on the house. It did not fall, for it was founded on the rock. The wise who builds wisely. This process is so important for us to understand, brethren. Wisdom builds one stone at a time. And you say, how does that really look in a life? It looks by making your decisions carefully. A well-built life is made one good decision at a time. This is not at any point at all one wise act. It is instead a lifetime of wise acts. You want to see somebody who's got a good marriage? It's not because they made one good decision. It's because they made thousands of wise decisions. You know, see somebody who's able to retire at 65, who's able to have put back and been careful with what they were given. It's not that they made one good decision, although in some cases financially there could be one decision that was more impactful than another. Sure. But that's the way it is with every subject matter, isn't it? You say, well, you have a good marriage. You know how you get a good marriage? You start by the wise decision of marrying the right person. It starts with one big decision, but then you want to have a good marriage, it's going to take a lot more wise decisions after that. Wise decisions made over a period of time, not one in isolation. Brethren, wisdom then sees what must be done and sees what it takes to get it done, and then wisdom goes and does it. Do you see that in the illustration of the house? Young people need to really give some serious consideration to how your decisions will shape your life. You see, you're not going to graduate high school because you made one wise test, one wise decision, one wise process. It's going to be because you have made a bunch of wise decisions and to the best of your ability avoided the foolish ones. You want to have a good life, it's not going to happen by accident. It's going to happen by wise decisions made consecutively. Wise decision after wise decision. I want you to see this. Hold your spot in Matthew 7. Go to Luke's account of this same story, this same parable. That's Luke 6, please. Luke 6. Nothing about this indicates that it's simple. Nothing about this indicates it's casual or easy. It's just phone it in. It'll work. No big deal. Phone it in. No. Everything about this stresses the import of each decision and the work that is required of it. So Luke 6, listen to this. Why do you call me Lord, Lord? This is verse 46. Luke 6:46. Why do you call me Lord, Lord? Do not do the things I say. Whoever comes to me and hears my sayings and does them, I will show you whom he is like. You see this? He is like a man building a house who dug deep, laid a foundation on the rock. When the flood arose, the stream beat vehemently against the house. It could not shake it, for it was founded on the rock. But he who heard and did nothing is like the man who built a house on the earth without a foundation, against which the stream beat vehemently, and immediately it fell, and the ruin of the house was great. You might carefully note, how did the wise man build in this story? Verse 48, he dug deep. You know, the structure is only as good as the foundation on which it sits. And brethren, I want you to understand historically in the Palestinian world, sand and that sandy loam type soil would get baked so hard in the summer months. Somebody would go out to a site and they'd say, hey, this is just the perfect spot for a house. And then they build it. And then what happens? Winter comes in, and winter rains, followed by spring rains, and that hard packed sandy soil is all of a sudden a big old mud mess, and the whole house falls. The practice of the first century world, and the Palestinian world in particular, was builders would go into the area and dig down through that sandy soil to the bedrock below it, and then would build the foundation, in some cases several feet deep, would build the foundation on the bedrock below it. And then, no matter what storm may come, the house would stand solid. It would stand firm. And brethren, we do that now. When you build a house now, what do they put under it before they start anything else? They put a great big rock. We call it a concrete slab. But you know what they do with those great big skyscrapers? They dig all the soil out, and they dig it down, and they pour piers, rock, and they build a whole solid concrete foundation. I had a friend that was an architect on skyscrapers down in Houston. And to hear him describe how they build those great big high-rises in Houston was pretty incredible. The army of concrete trucks that come in. Why? Because the building is only as good as the foundation on which it sits. Now I want you to see this then. Not only is it wisdom, but it's hard work. It's not going to happen by accident. It happens with purpose and intentionality. It happens by choices and the wisdom that makes those good choices. You ever dug a hole? Not exactly easy, is it? One of the worst words you could ever hear said on a ranch was, the auger is broke. And what did that mean? It meant we were going to get the post hole diggers out, and we're going to take post hole diggers and Now, dig a few of those. Or the skid steer's broke, and now what's going to happen? Oh, shovels and wheelbarrows. You dug a hole recently? Let me tell you something, folks. It takes hard work. Make no mistake about it. If we're going to build wisely, it's going to take hard work. It's going to take some care and some attention to the details to make sure what we're building on is a solid rock. Because all other ground truly is sinking sand. It might fool the foolish builder, but the wise see what must be done. And the wise make the careful decisions to build for the future, not just the here and now. A fool moves in and says, this will work, let's phone it in, let's make it happen right here. But what does the wise say? It'll never last. If we don't build it wisely, it'll fall. If we don't build it carefully, it's not going to stick. The wise see what wisdom demands and the future process to make it happen. You want to be something? You want to be successful? You want to have a good marriage? You want to have a good profession, you want to be faithful in your service to King Jesus, then what you must do is build wisely. I want to draw your attention to something else in this text. We're still working on this idea. I told you we're going to spend more time on this one. I want you to go back to Matthew 7, please. I want to show this to you. I think it's so important. Back to Matthew chapter 7. How do you practically do what we're talking about? Hear and do. Hear and do. Verse 24, whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them. Verse 26, everyone who hears these sayings of mine and does not do them. Wisdom is not in knowing and believing. Wisdom is not found in knowing and understanding. Wisdom is found in knowing and doing. There's a lot of people that know and understand. There's a lot of people in this world that know and believe, but there are very few indeed who know and obey. Folks, I need you to see this. In verse 24 and 26, the words we just read, I need you to understand this. Both parties heard the word. Did you catch that? Now, some of that I've been emphasizing. I hope you picked up on it by now. Both parties heard the word. The distinguishing feature was their response to the word. Both parties heard the word. Folks, we're not talking about some worldlian, some outcast who has no regard for Jesus Christ, has no regard for the gospel. What we are talking about are the people hearing the word. We're talking about people sitting in pews. You see, it's not the worldlian who hears and doesn't do. He never hears. He doesn't want to hear. It's the people who profess to serve King Jesus who are hearing but not doing. It's people in the pew who've convinced themselves that this is all God requires of me. Earlier in this same chapter, he took issue with those who were saying and not doing. You remember that, verses 21 through 23? Or saying and doing wrong. They're making a great show of their saying, but they're not doing what the Father's will was. Well, now the issue is, it's not just what you're hearing, it's the fact that you're not doing. Brethren, it takes more than say. It takes hear and obey. Now here's why. Here's why this is so important. Wisdom builds wisely. Here's why this is so important. The storm is coming. Both texts emphasize this. Verse 24, the wise he builds on the rock. Verse 25, the rain descended, the floods came, the winds blew and beat on that house. It did not fall, for it was founded on the rock. Verse 26, everyone who hears these sayings of mine does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain descended, the floods came, the winds blew and beat on that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. You understand the time to prepare for the storm is before the storm comes. And the storm makes no distinction between parties. The storm comes on the wise man built on the rock and the fool built on the sand. The storm inevitably comes. The only way to survive the storm is to have a house built on the rock. If we can tie that in with what's taught elsewhere, and certainly implied in this text, the only way to build a life that can stand against the storms is to build it on Jesus Christ. That's the rock, and that's the rock of the New Testament. The flood comes in and washes out all of these fakers. You know, you take these two houses side by side and they might look good. But you and I both know there's a big difference between a cheap builder and a good builder, isn't there? We're in the process of trying to get a home bought. And one of the first things we've asked a few of these people, our realtor, about neighborhoods is, who built this neighborhood? Who built this neighborhood? Because we know the difference, don't we? That house looks good, but what's going to happen in 5 years? The house is not going to look the same, is it? What's going to happen in 10 years? What's going to happen when we get some of those good straight lines? I don't know, the wind that never stops blowing on the plains? Yeah, what's going to happen now? Are those shingles going to stay? Is the siding going to be there? Are those bricks going to stick? You know, there's a great big difference between poor builders and good builders. And brethren, the storm makes the distinction. The storm comes through and shows the shoddy work. Now here's the thing. I think we could apply this to what we would sometimes call the storms of life. In fact, that's sometimes how I've preached this text. The storms of life. Tragedy strikes. Are you prepared to handle it? And you can't be prepared to handle it if you don't have Jesus. Yeah, I preached that sermon and I'm going to keep preaching it. I've been impressed more just in prep for this study that may not be what's on the Jewish mind. Now, we could tie this in with some Old Testament stuff, which is certainly in the Sermon on the Mount. Okay, if you hadn't picked up on the Old Testament all throughout the Sermon on the Mount, I have done my job very poorly. But it's there. All over the Sermon on the Mount is the Old Testament behind every bit of it. But I want you to see this. Go back a little bit in the text to Matthew 5. Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5. Just a couple of times, Jesus sprinkles some of these ideas in. Verse 21. Matthew 5:21, you've heard that it was said of those of old, you shall not murder. Whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. Verse 22, I say to you, whoever is angry with his brother without a cause will be in danger of the judgment. Whoever says to his brother, Raca, will be in danger of the council. Whoever says, you fool, will be in danger of hellfire. Verse 29, your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you, for it is profitable that for one of your members perish, not that your whole body be cast into hell. The very end of verse 30, that not your whole body be cast into hell. What's his point? Chapter 6, verse 1 mentions the reward you have from heaven, the reward you have from your Father, and if you're not doing your work like you should be with the right heart, you don't have that reward from the Father. 3 more times in Matthew chapter 6, he mentions the reward that the Father will give you in secret. He'll reward you openly, he says. A little later, he says in verse 19 that you should lay up treasure in heaven. Why? Because it's the one way you can guarantee a successful retirement, a spiritual retirement. In chapter 7, verse 13, he mentions the narrow way and the broad way leading to destruction. Do you notice the subtle point emphasized throughout the sermon? Judgment is coming. You say Matthew chapter 7, verses 28, 29, all the conclusion he gives here, the shocking authority with which Jesus spoke. Folks, in part, that is because Jesus spoke so authoritatively about the judgment coming. Do you see that, folks? When he's talking about the storm that's coming, he's not talking about just tragedies of life. He's talking about the judgment. You see, that's how the Jews would have understood it. Can I emphasize that a little bit just by point of illustration? When God tells Noah to build the ark of gopher wood, a storm's coming, what is he really talking about? Judgment of the world. You want to see Matthew 7, 24 through 29 illustrated vividly? Go look at Noah's life. Build your life on God, or you're going to be, that was the sound of a drain flushing. Do you see that, folks? Genesis 7 illustrates the truth behind Matthew 7. That you don't build your life on God, you're going to be shaken loose in the storm. And then God emphasizes that even further throughout the Old Testament when He warns His people that a storm's coming. What's He talking about? He's not talking about just a storm, He's talking about judgment to come. Folks, when Jesus ends this sermon, He's not just ending this sermon on some touchy-feely nonsense. He's saying, judgment is coming. Have you built on the rock? Or are you building on sinking sand? You appreciate then that this is some of the last words of the greatest sermon ever preached? Build wisely. The storm is coming. Can I conclude with a question then? Which do you choose? Do you choose to build wisely on the King Jesus Christ? To not just hear and say, but to hear and obey. To not just give lip service and acknowledgement and pretty thinking, that I'll give him an hour on Sunday morning, but that's all I really got to offer. That's all he's going to get from me. Are we just going to give him just the leftovers? Well, I'm pretty busy right now, Lord. And I recognize that building is hard work. And I recognize that building takes some attention. But the best I can give you is a few hours. You ever taken on a big project and all you can devote to it is 1 hour on Sunday? I'll show you a project you'll never finish. Do you understand then that that's what we're talking about when we're talking about building a life, wisely building a life on the King Jesus Christ, on the rock of our salvation? To understand that that's exactly what we just sang. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. Brethren, it's because of this. You put your hope in anything else and it's going to disappoint you. Maybe I should just drive that home a little bit more. It's not just going to disappoint you, it's going to ruin you. It's going to flatten you. You put your hope in anything else. Did you notice what both accounts, Matthew's account and Luke's account, ends with? The fool builds foolishly. And when the storm comes, the house falls. And both accounts conclude with, and great will be its fall. Which do you choose? Do you choose to hear and obey? Can I work on that just for a minute? Go back earlier in Matthew. Just to kind of highlight a couple of things. Some of these we've already read, some of these we've already studied this year, but I want to drive it home, connecting it to Jesus' invitation. So he says, the text we read a moment ago, verse 21, you heard it said to those of old, you shall not murder, but it's more than that, verse 22. If you look at hatred in your heart to your brother, are you really applying that? Or are you just hearing it, giving it lip service? A little later, he says, verse 28 and following, are you really being careful about your heart? About not letting lust have an inch? About not giving in to those temptations? Are you hearing that and just giving it some sort of acknowledgement? Yeah, that's probably good advice from the Lord, sure. Are you doing it? Are you holding verse 31 and 32, marriage in high regard, because that's what the King said? Or are you just giving a lip service? Marriage is really good. Bible talks about that all the time. It's good. Are you holding your marriage in high regard, giving it the attention it's due? Or are you letting your yes be yes and your no be no? Can people count on you to be truthful and honest and committed and serious? Maybe a little bit further. Are you really loving your enemies like Christ would have you love them? Are you giving them the preference, or are you giving them the stink eye? It takes more than hearing and acknowledging, hearing and believing. It takes hearing and doing. In chapter 6, are you seriously giving your silent service to the Lord? It's not about some show. It's about some serious service. A little later in Matthew 6, are you seriously laying up your treasures in heaven? Verses 19 through 21. Are you hearing? Well, that's a good idea. For you younger people, you should really perk up now. You should really think about what you do and how you do it and making sure you're serving the Lord. I can't tell you how many times I've had an older person tell me, that serving Jesus stuff, I'm really glad you're doing that. Then why don't you do it? Well, that's really good for you younger people. It's good for old people too. It's good for all people. Are you doing that? I really would like my child to obey the gospel. It's not going to help them if you're not going to show them how to serve the King Jesus Christ. That's not going to help them if they don't choose to follow Him faithfully. That is getting dunked in the water. But if you're not going to live for King Jesus, what does that benefit them? But we sometimes do that, don't we? Need to get them baptized. If they're not going to stay faithful to the Lord, what's that going to help them? If they're not going to truly lay up treasures in heaven. A little later, in verse 25 and following, kind of cap it off at verse 33, seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. Are you truly seeking God? Or are you living for Him? Hearing and acknowledging is not enough. Hearing and nodding your head in my sermons is not enough. But I'm going to make you do it anyways. You understand that? Folks, it takes more than a head nod. It takes more than acknowledgement. It takes more than understanding. It takes doing it. It takes commitment. It takes service. It takes a serious disciple. And folks, do you see then why he comes to the end of the sermon in Matthew chapter 7 and he just lays it all out? You either take the narrow way or the broad way. But you better choose wisely, because the broad way leads to destruction and there are plenty of people making their way that way. You choose wisely. Are you listening to the false prophet in sheep's clothing? That wolf will eat you alive, and you're going to let him if you don't be careful, if you don't choose wisely. Are you being discerning about the fruit? Are you giving lip service to the King? Lord, I've just done all this stuff for you. Lord, you should see how much I showed up at the 11 o'clock. You know, Lord, I'll go so far as to say, Lord, I showed up at most of the 11 o'clocks. You're sure lucky to have me, Lord. Lord, I even prayed for my brother in Christ one time. Do you see, folks? It's not just the one who hears and acknowledges. It's not just the one who hears and believes. It's not just the one who hears and understands. It is the one who hears and does. Make no mistake about it. Which do you choose? That is a choice that only you can make. Hear and do, or hear and do not do. Two foundations, which will you choose? Two builders, which are you? One dividing storm. Are you ready for it? One rock. Are you building on Him? Will the truth fall on attentive and active ears? You know, in some respects, Jesus' preaching flies in the face of what most people want in preaching. You know, most people want just this touchy, feely-goody nonsense. You know, they want to come in and they want to float out on clouds because the preacher just made them feel so warm and fuzzy. I think that's good to do occasionally. I think we should do that. People need to understand how good and fuzzy it is to serve the King Jesus Christ, how marvelous it is. But I'll tell you something, folks. The ending of Matthew 7, the ending of the greatest sermon ever preached, ought to wake all of us up. There is too much at stake to pat you on the back all the time and just say, you're doing great, when all of us could do better. All of us. So will we build wisely, knowing the storm is coming? You've listened well this morning. Maybe you're sitting here this morning and you're kind of shaken by some of these things. I don't want you to leave shaken. I want you to leave helped. I want you to leave convicted. I want you to leave with a confidence in King Jesus that only He can give you. So maybe you're sitting here this morning shaking. Let's make it right. Let's fix this. Let's put you on the solid foundation, because all other ground is sinking sand. It may be that you have experienced some of these blessings before and went back out into the world. You maybe have been pricked by some of the things we've discussed this morning. Come home. Build once more on the King Jesus Christ. Thank you for the way you've listened. If we can help you in some way this morning, this is your opportunity as we stand and sing.